So I'm going to go ahead and get started. It might have been a little bit of we've had a little break from Zoom defenses. So I'm just going to review our etiquette. So all audience participants are going to be muted throughout the seminar. Do not try to attempt to turn your video or share your screen during the talk. There will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions at the end of the talk, just like in a normal seminar. So once Emma has finished her talk, you can use Zoom's raise hand feature to notify the meeting host that you would like to ask a question. During the question and answer portion of the talk, you're welcome to turn on your video. So with that, I will go ahead and get started with Emma's introduction. So it is my pleasure today to introduce Emma. So Emma first approached me about being an intern in the lab. And as many of you guys know, I always do a little bit of background research, try to figure out what kind of projects these students could work on. And when I did my little stalking, it was very clear that she spent a lot of times outdoors. This was also on her CV as she did a lot of kind of outdoor activities in college. She also was a runner, which I thought, okay, that could be good if we have to chase any seals. And apparently she can also leap and fly. So I thought, well, you never know, that could be very handy if we have to catch animals also. After coming to the lab as an intern and student, she did continue to develop field skills, spending a lot of time out on the water, outdoors, and rock climbing. So I was like, okay, she has a wide variety of skills. She'll be great to help out in a variety of different field projects. The second thing I often look at is, does she like animals? Again, we're going to be handling a lot of animals. I want to make sure that the students respect the animals that we're studying. But what she doesn't know, and what really sold me, was that apparently she also really likes my favorite animal. This was my favorite cartoon as a kid. I watched it every day after school, Scooby-Doo. So once I saw this, definitely was excited to have her join the lab as an intern. So she interned in the lab for about a year. She became an essential member of the stranding team. I figured I wouldn't show any dead animal pictures for that. She also helped with some of the elephant seal projects, like helped with wiener weighing. And then she worked as a kayak guide, which is really what got her excited about the study species that she's going to talk about today. So I'm not going to talk too much about the harbor seal work, but she joined the lab in 2020, which most of you guys will remember was kind of right in the midst of COVID, but we were able to come up with a project where she could use previously collected data and collect some additional data and still move forward with her project despite lots of shutdowns. So I'm not going to talk much about her harbor seal work because she'll be doing that today, but basically Emma became an essential team member to our lab. She helped out on everyone's project. She became the stranding coordinator and the beachcombers coordinator, so she coordinated volunteer responders. She helped with responses, and she helped me with things like reports. She also helped graduate students with their research. So she helped to collect otter behavioral observations. She helped to weigh elephant seals and do tag resites, and she also helped with cetacean photo ID. So she was involved in a lot of student projects in her free time. And she still managed to work to support herself. So she continued to work as a kayak guide and a naturalist. She also worked as a protected species observer. So she spent a lot of time in Elkhorn Slough between her work and her thesis. She also worked as a whale watching naturalist and an aerial observer. And despite all of her own thesis work, helping other students, working to support herself, she still managed to find time to build snowmen, go skiing, bar hopping, and apparently instead of smelling the roses, smelling the trees. Took time to smell the trees. Emma has been a pleasure to have in the lab, and we really miss having her around. She was always up for kind of the lab social events. So sometimes, going out for beer, bowling, the awkward Christmas photo. And then she coordinated or organized her own send-off, which was a lab outing to the climbing gym. So we've missed having her in the lab, and we're excited to see her finish today. Just to highlight some of her academic successes, she's already presented her project or her research at 2 Western Society of Naturalists conferences. She's also presented at the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve meeting, and she will be presenting it in Perth at the Marine Mammal Conference in November. She has been the recipient of several awards and scholarships, including Coast, the Simpkins Scholarship, and the Wave Award. And with that, I would like to pass it off to Emma so she can tell us about what she's been working on.
Thank you, Gita, for that introduction. You really dug deep into my Facebook for some of those photos. Hey, so hello everyone. Thank you for coming to my virtual thesis defense titled Use of a California Wetland Harbor Seal Haulout Patterns in Elkhorn Slough. Just gonna jump right into it here. To start off, animals require many different resources to survive. This can include access to food sources or a safe place to shelter from adverse weather or predators. And many species migrate long distances to access these resources. This can look like the migration of elk throughout the greater Yellowstone ecosystem between their wintering grounds at lower elevations and their higher elevation summer feeding grounds. It can also look like the migration of humpback whales from cold water feeding grounds to warm water nurseries. But access to necessary resources doesn't always require such large movements. Many coastal marine species exhibit small changes in habitat use in response to weather, such as temperature changes, wind and rain, daylight length, tide levels, prey availability, or changes in their own energy demands, such as during the nesting season. Animals may also move around in response to human activity or intrusion into the animal's environment. Today, I will be talking about my research on the small-scale movement patterns of a non-migratory coastal species, the harbor seal. Harbor seals are a small, non-migratory pinniped found throughout the Northern Hemisphere. They are seen along the entire west coast of the United States and are common throughout the Monterey Bay area, foraging for squid and flatfish at night and hauling out on protected sandy beaches and rocky shorelines during the day for rest and thermoregulation. Harbor seals are not migratory, but can change where they haul out on a daily basis. Female seals give birth to one pup each spring, which stays with the mother for about 4 to 6 weeks before weaning. All harbor seals also go through an annual molt each summer, during which they lose all their fur and grow an entirely new coat. While molting, seals have to stay on land for longer periods because the process is faster when they are warm and dry. The region that I focused on for my study is the Elkhorn Slough, found in the middle of Monterey Bay. Elkhorn Slough is a tidal wetland that includes a variety of habitats and sandy beaches that are perfect for harbor seal haulout. The objectives of my study were to determine the patterns of abundance of harbor seals in Elkhorn Slough, evaluating both seasonal and environmental factors. I would then compare those seasonal and environmental patterns to historical data. I also wanted to determine the changes in the distribution of harbor seals in Elkhorn Slough, again, evaluating seasonal and environmental factors. Basically, my research is split into 2 parts, patterns of abundance and patterns of distribution. I will go through the methods and results of each one separately and then discuss the implications of both at the end. So, starting with abundance patterns. I wanted to look at the seasonal changes in the number of seals in Elkhorn Slough and then compare those changes to historical data. I also wanted to look at patterns based on environmental conditions such as tide height and air temperature. To do this, I used a dataset collected by volunteers from the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve. The Reserve Otter Monitoring Program, or ROMP, has volunteers go out twice a month to over 14 locations throughout Elkhorn Slough. As their name implies, the program initially started to collect information on sea otters, but they also collect harbor seal data as well. Each survey, the number of seals seen both hauled out and in the water is recorded. They have been collecting seal data twice a month since June 2020. The historical data set I used was collected by Dr. Dion Oxman, a previous Moss Landing student. At this time, seals were only hauled out at 3 locations, the areas circled in blue on the map here. His data set was collected from 1991 to 1992. This graph here depicts the maximum number of seals seen in a survey. This includes numbers from the current ROMP data, Oxman's data, and previous studies in Elkhorn Slough. As you can see, the maximum number of seals has risen from about 25 seals 50 years ago to just under 200 in the early 90s to almost 300 currently. Looking at this data a bit differently, here's a plot of just Oxman's data and the current ROMP data. The central line in the box plot represents the median number of seals seen during each survey, and the red dot the mean. Again, there has been a significant increase over the last 30 years. Another thing to note is that these results so far have been all about adults or juvenile seals, not pups. There were no pups seen in Elkhorn Slough 30 years ago, but now there can be up to 50 or 60 pups seen during a single survey. The next part of my analysis looked at the patterns of abundance based on seasonal and environmental factors. Looking at the graph on the left here, you can see that the greatest number of seals were seen in Elkhorn Slough during the molting season and the lowest during the fall and winter. But when comparing this to Oxman's data from 30 years ago, at that point, the highest number were still seen during the molting season, but the lowest were seen during the pupping season. This, combined with the fact that no pups were seen in the slough 30 years ago, implies that seals were actually leaving Elkhorn Slough to go pup elsewhere, whereas now plenty of pupping is occurring in Elkhorn Slough. The graph on the right here shows the relationship between the number of hauled out seals and tide height. And as the tide height increases, the number of hauled out seals decreases. I didn't find any changes in harbor seal abundance due to changes in air temperature. So the main takeaways from the first half of my project here are that use of Elkhorn Slough by harbor seals has increased over the last 30 years. The greatest abundance of seals occurs during the summer molting period, and at higher tides, fewer seals are seen. Pupping is also now occurring in Elkhorn Slough. Now, on to the second half of my results. For this part, I wanted to look at how the distribution of seals changed within Elkhorn Slough. Again, I looked at seasonal changes and patterns based on environmental conditions. I used the ROMP data again for this part, but also conducted additional surveys at the 5 most used haul-out locations in Elkhorn Slough. These surveys were conducted 2 to 4 times a month from March 2022 to May 2023. In order to decide which haul-out areas to focus on, I looked at the previous 2 years of ROMP. This graph here shows the mean number of seals at each of the haul-out locations each month. From this graph, I chose the 5 locations with the most seals: North Harbor, East Wildlife, Seal Bend, Moonglow, and Avila. In the next few slides, we'll look at each of these sites in more detail. This is just a map of all the sites here. You can see that they cover the diverse area of the slough. The yellow bars show where the locations change, and the blue circles are the actual haul-out areas in the slough. The blue stars are the observation points for each of the surveys. Looking at North Harbor here, as its name implies, North Harbor is located in Moss Landing Harbor. It has a sandy substrate and is located less than 1 kilometer from the ocean. Since it is in the harbor and close to the boating channel, it is very common for boats and kayaks to pass by, and it is a common spot for people to view seals from land. There are actually a bunch of seals in this photo here, right along the waterline to the left of the picture. Next is East Wildlife. East Wildlife is about 1.5 kilometers into Elkhorn Slough. The substrate here is mud at lower tides and pickleweed at higher tides. There's lots of human activity here, including kayaking and fishing. Seal Bend is similar to East Wildlife. Mud flats at lower tides and pickleweed at higher tides, lots of human activity. Moonglow is deeper into the slough, just over 3 kilometers from the ocean. This area is all low-lying mud flats. And the final location is Avila, just over 5 kilometers from the ocean. The substrate here is also mud, but it is located on the Elkhorn Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, and so is not accessible to the public. So I combined the data from the ROMP surveys and my additional surveys to create this graph here, looking at the distribution of seals throughout the slough. The y-axis is just the number of seals at that location for each survey. Some of the locations, like North Harbor and East Wildlife, have more stable numbers of seals throughout the year. The other three have more varied numbers. Some highlights are the spike at Seal Bend during the pupping season, the fact that there's basically no seals at Moonglow during the pupping or molting seasons, but a very high number during the winter, and the high amount of seals at Avila during the molting season. Given that we already know there are changes in abundance throughout the year, I decided to look at the proportion of seals at each location during each survey instead of the raw abundance. For example, on April 14th, 2022, there were 42 seals seen at North Harbor and 164 seals seen among all 5 locations. This means that around 25% of the seals seen during the survey were in the North Harbor. The results on the next few slides are using these proportions. The proportion of seals hauled out at North Harbor, East Wildlife, and Avila were only influenced by the time of year. At North Harbor, there were the lowest proportion of seals seen during the pupping season, similar numbers seen throughout the rest of the year. At East Wildlife, the highest proportion of seals were seen during the pupping season and the lowest during the winter. And at Avila, the highest proportion seen during the molting season and the lowest during the winter. For Seal Bend and Moonglow, the proportion of seals was also influenced by the height of the tide. At Seal Bend, there were the highest proportion of seals during the pupping season, and during the fall, there's actually a higher proportion of seals seen at higher tides. This doesn't mean that there are more seals hauled out at high tides. It just means that the ones that were hauled out were most likely at Seal Bend. And if you remember at Moonglow, there were very few seals seen there during the pupping and molting periods, so these periods were not included in my calculations for Moonglow. Here, the winter had a higher proportion of seals than the fall, and during both times, the proportion of seals there dropped as the tide height rose. And again, all of these results were just adults, so now we'll look at the distribution of pups within Elkhorn Slough. This analysis is just using plain abundance again, because we are only looking at one season. The greatest number of pups were observed at Avila, with Seal Bend and East Wildlife also having a significant amount. There were no pups seen at North Harbor and Moonglow. Comparing the pup distribution to the adult distribution, you can see that they don't follow the same pattern. Avila has many more pups than the number of adults would imply, and North Harbor much less. This means that some areas in the slough are more preferable than others for mothers and pups. The main takeaway from this section of the presentation is that season influenced the distribution of seals in Elkhorn Slough across all locations. Tide only influenced haul-out distribution at Seal Bend and Moonglow. There is a higher proportion of seals at Avila during the molting season and a higher proportion of seals at Seal Bend at higher tides. And pups occur mostly at Seal Bend and Avila. Now I'll talk about what some of these results mean. I'm going to discuss potential reasons for population increase from 1991, why there's such a high number of seals during the molting season, what the effects of sea level rise could be on haulouts, why air temperature seemed to have no effect on harbor seal abundance in Elkhorn Slough, and what the distribution of pups looks like. First off, why has the amount of seals hauled out in Elkhorn Slough increased so much over the last 30 years? Throughout much of the last century, many areas of the slough were dammed to create farmland. This restricted the flow of water throughout the wetland. In recent years, efforts to restore a healthy wetland have reopened some of these areas. This map here from Van Dyke and Wasson, 2005, shows how Avila has changed in the last couple decades. Looking in the orange boxes, you can see that the Avila area didn't have any tidal flow in 1980 and was inaccessible to seals. In the more recent 2000 map, that area now has fully restored unrestricted tidal flow. Given that so many seals are now seen in Avila, opening of this area could be a reason for the increase in seal abundance. Another reason could be that harbor seals are philopatric, meaning they return to the area where they were born. Obviously, some seals had to break this pattern in order to begin pupping in Elkhorn Slough, but now that so many pups are born here each year, more seals could be returning in a positive feedback loop. There are multiple reasons why so many more seals are seen hauled out during the molting season. One, since seals need to be hauled out in order to molt, they have to spend more time on land and then are more likely to be counted during surveys. Two, seals could be entering from the surrounding areas in order to molt. Perhaps the more secluded areas of Elkhorn Slough or Avila are more desirable for molting seals than the rocky shoreline of Monterey. And three, there's an influx of newly weaned pups that are now being counted along with the rest of the adults and juveniles in order to inflate those numbers. Over the next 20 years, the relative sea level in the United States is predicted to rise by 1/4 to 1/3 of a meter. This could put low-lying areas like Moonglow at risk and force more seals to use higher areas like Seal Bend that are already used more heavily at high tides. Other currently unused areas may become important as well, and so this entire haul-out pattern currently seen in Elkhorn Slough could change. In other studies, the ambient air temperature had an effect on the number of seals hauled out. In this study, I found that air temperature had no influence. One potential reason is that the air temperature in Monterey Bay doesn't fluctuate enough throughout the year to make a difference. Given that there's only a few degrees Celsius of change, it may not affect the seals at all. Also, the temperature data I used was collected at the Moss Landing Marine Lab's weather station, shown here on the map as the red star, 1 to 5 kilometers away from the study locations. There may be microclimate differences at each of the haul-out sites that were not detected that far away. Finally, let's talk about the distribution of pups within Elkhorn Slough. The distribution of pups did not match the distribution of adults. This implies that there are some areas preferred by mothers with pups. The slope of the haul-out location nor exposure to human activity explains the pup distribution pattern. There could be potential other reasons that explain the pup distribution, including microclimates at each location. It is harder for pups to thermoregulate than adults, given their small body size, so temperature changes that don't affect the adults may affect the pups. For any future studies in Elkhorn Slough, I would recommend getting microclimate data at each of the haul-out locations to see if this has any effect. In conclusion, harbor seal abundance and distribution within Elkhorn Slough changes based on season and tide height. There has been an increase in the number of seals using Elkhorn Slough over the last 30 years. Knowing seal haul-out patterns can inform the design of future seal research projects in Elkhorn Slough, as well as other local research and restoration projects aimed to avoid harbor seal disturbance and increase harbor seal habitat. The factors that are important to harbor seals in an easily accessible location like Elkhorn Slough can be translated to other harbor seal habitats that may be harder to study and inform research projects in those locations as well. So I would like to thank my advisor, Gita, for accepting me as a student and supporting me on this journey, and the rest of my committee, Amanda and Kirstine, for their expertise on this project. Thank you to my funding sources, Moss Landing Wave Award and Simpkins Scholarship and the Postgraduate Student Research Award. Thank you to Ron Eby, the expert in all things Elkhorn Slough, as well as all of the ROMP volunteers, especially Gerda and Marlene, and then all of my other seal survey volunteers, especially Keenan and Jack, who stuck it out for an entire year helping me out in this slough. And with that, I will take any questions.
Nice job, Emma. Let's see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I might have one. Well, maybe I'll try to get the ball going. You talked about how these surveys can be used to inform. Do you know of any examples where like harbor seal distribution has been used to inform on management?
I know there have been projects in the UK, I think, studying, I think it was like wind energy plants or dams, and placing those in areas that were not near popular haul-out sites. Just because one haul-out site is empty at the time of the survey doesn't mean it's empty all year round. So knowing those patterns at different sites can inform projects that happen all year round.
Any other questions?
Great job, Emma.
Amanda has her hand
Thanks,
raised.
Hi, Emma. Great job. It was really great to hear the story after reading the story as well. And I was thinking, especially in your discussion as you were discussing these times when other people might use this information. I know that on the Monterey Peninsula, the population of harbor seals that haul out down by Hopkins Marine Station have been the source of a lot of, I guess, change in scheduling of things like construction and road work during their pupping times. Would you have recommendations of things that you learned from your observations that might inform those kind of in similar veins or similar ways? Either
For
for Elkhorn
that-
Slough or, yeah.
For that project specifically, or just anywhere in general?
Well, anywhere, I guess, thinking about just the patterns that you noted in Elkhorn Slough and whether that's informative of activities in Elkhorn Slough or whether that's thinking about what kinds of tracking might need to happen for other populations that are near urban environments.
I definitely think it could be extrapolated to other similar areas. I think just learning what factors are important to harbor seals or what factors are important to specifically mothers with pups or young juveniles, yearlings that could perhaps be more vulnerable than other adult species, probably holds true for all harbor seals, not just the ones in Elkhorn Slough. And so that can be used to inform those other projects.
Yeah, thank you.
Ooh, and we have a question all the way from Portugal, I think. Lauren.
Hi, yes, congrats, Emma. Great defense. Greetings from Portugal. I was just wondering, I know your project was more so looking at like the population, abundance, and everything, but I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about potentials for kind of like following individual animals. Were there any like known individuals that you feel like you saw repeatedly, or would they need to be tagged or branded in some other way in order to do that type of work?
Yeah, I could not tell the difference between any individual seal in Elkhorn Slough. I know that the population in Pacific Grove, some of them are identified by coat patterns, but I think you'd have to get really good photos of them, especially because the seals in Elkhorn Slough are often just fully covered in mud. So it's really hard to identify those fur patterns. But I do think there is a benefit in tracking individual seals, probably ideally through tagging, just to determine things like if during the molting season, there's that great influx of seals, trying to figure out whether it's the same seals that are just spending more time on land, or if there are actually new seals coming in from other areas, meaning that the slough is a desirable location for seals to come and molt, I think would be an interesting thing to know. It also is really hard to tell the difference between the sexes of harbor seals. So being able to track individuals, you can tell whether a haul out site is just for mothers and pups, or if it's for males, or it's for a mixed group of juveniles. And that would be interesting to look at as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Congrats. Great defense.
Looks like Kirsten's next.
Great talk, Emma. So clear. My question is maybe following up on the idea of an individual seal. Is a seal deciding where to haul out or whether to haul out? Like when you find a correlation with tidal elevation, are they just deciding this is a tide I want to forage on, not haul out on? Or are they deciding I don't like Seal Bend, I'm going somewhere else?
That's a very good question that I don't think I have an answer for. I think you'd have to look at whether, so like how at Seal Bend, how there are, more seals at higher tides. Are those seals that have chosen to haul out at that tide, or are those the seals that are just happen to be left on that higher land when the tide has risen? And so I think you would need to be out there watching the seals and tracking all their behavior for a lot longer periods of time than these snapshot surveys in order to track when and where they're getting out of the water. And if one individual is always getting out of the water at the same place every day, or if they move around the slough.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Or do we just let her get off the hook, congratulate her, and then she can hang out with her committee for a little bit longer? Okay, I don't see any more. So congratulations, Emma. I'll let other people. You're getting lots of messages, just so if your chats.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, everyone's typing, so we got to give them time to type. Yeah, no, that was a great presentation. You're the first student that has done a presentation that we didn't do a practice with.
I know. Just a little worried about.
No, you did great. But I always get nervous for you guys anyway. I don't know why, because you guys always do great. But I was like, oh. All right, we're getting to a smaller group. So once you guys have congratulated Emma, if you don't mind signing off, we're going to have our committee meeting. And we'll also end the recording. All right, you're now the host, Emma. You'll probably have to transfer it to me at the very end.
Okay.